Welcome to Spec to Success, the series where I break down every assessment point from the OCR Economics A-Level specification to make sure you're ready for any question the exam board might throw your way. Okay, today we're diving into a foundational but often underappreciated topic: evaluate rationality as a way of understanding the behavior of economic agents. This comes under 1.1 of the economic problem, and while it may seem theoretical, it forms the backbone of how economists model decision-making, from everyday consumer choices to government policy. This video will cover firms, and following videos will cover consumers and governments. This point, by the way, is highly examinable. It could come as an 8 marker, a 12 marker, a 15 marker, even a 25 marker for this question. So a little bit of background. This video will be about firms and rationality. And just as a bit of context, questions needing evaluation make up over 60% of your entire grade for OCR. So it's incredibly important we master these key points. And by the way, as a side note, this isn't just for OCR. These concepts are assessed in almost identical ways across AQA and Edexcel as well. So no matter your exam board, this will help. I'm also assuming that you've already covered the basics, but if you haven't, no worries. There are clear topic by topic notes available on the Offer Track website. So, has this question come up before? Yes, it has. It's come up in 2020, and it goes, evaluate using evidence from the stimulus material how rationality may help us understand the behavior of firms. Okay, so this is an interesting question, and let's decode it quickly. The key point here is firms. When the examiner asks us how rationality helps understand the behavior of firms, they're really asking, does the assumption that firms act logically to maximize profit actually explain what we see in the real world? We're judging how useful or limited this model is in practice. Okay, let's begin with the introduction. So essentially, the introduction for all evaluate questions in OCR is a way to show off your key knowledge and understanding, which is your AO1. The summing up of all your points is for the judgment. So let's start defining, the first one being rationality. This is the idea that economic agents, whether they be consumers, firms, or the government, make decisions to maximize their objectives. Consumers aim to maximize their utility or satisfaction. Producers aim to maximize their profits, and governments aim to maximize social welfare. Of course, in this question, we would only talk about producers, but this introduction can be recycled for questions about consumers and governments as well. This model also assumes agents have perfect information, clear preferences, and a logical decision-making process, meaning all participants in the market have knowledge of all relevant information in the system, so they can weigh up costs and benefits and choose the option which gives them the highest net gain. So we're assuming perfect information. This is the starting point for many economic models, from demand curves to cost-benefit analysis. But how realistic is it? And how well does it explain real-world behavior? Let's analyze. So let's start with the idea that rationality is actually pretty useful for understanding how firms behave. If we assume that firms are profit maximizers, then it makes sense that they'll enter the markets where they'll believe they'll make the most profits. That's how standard economic theory works. Firms make decisions by comparing the marginal cost and marginal benefit of entering or staying in a market. Now, let's think about the renewable energy sector, which is mentioned in the extract. As governments offer subsidies and demand for green energy rises, profits in that sector increase. So it's rational for big firms like Shell or Engie to enter. They're only responding to financial incentives. We can show this with a diagram of a firm in monopolistic competition making supernormal profits in the short run. This is the top diagram here. When profits are available, firms enter, supply increases, and these profits are gradually competed away to a point where normal profits are being made at PQ in the second diagram. That's classical rational behavior, firms responding to market signals. When profits can be made, they enter the industry. When they can't, they don't. But here's the evaluation. Not all firms act this way. The stimulus material mentions Samuel Makusa, a head teacher personally funding student education. Whilst he's not a firm, his actions reflect the kind of socially motivated behavior we sometimes see in businesses, particularly charitable organizations or startups with strong ethical missions. This can be called corporate social responsibility. These organizations may prioritize social impact over short-run profit. Although rational models assume that firms are always driven by profit maximization, real-world examples show that firms, like individuals, may act on non-financial objectives, limiting how useful rationality is. So sometimes firms act on ethics or even political pressure. These decisions don't line up neatly with rationality as economics defines it. So while rational models help explain why firms like Shell enter a profitable sector, it's less useful when firms are driven by social goals or moral values. Okay, now let's look at another way rationality can explain behavior of firms, even when firms don't seem to be profit maximizing in the short run. Think about this. A firm may deliberately choose not to make profit right now because it's aiming to make even more profit later on. That's still rational, just long-term rationality. Take Shell or Engie again. When they enter a new or developing market, like off-grid solar in rural Africa, they might aim to maximize their sales volume instead of profits. Why, you may ask? Because they want to build market share, gain consumer loyalty, and maybe even establish a dominant position. This is called price limiting, which makes firms' new entry into the market unprofitable. Think about this. Sales volume maximization is at the red dot here, which I've highlighted. Think about it. Any extra output in the market would be unprofitable as AC exceeds AR. You can see I've drawn here two orange dots. The gap represents the loss that would be made if a new firm enters the market and produces an extra quantity up until the point on the dashed line. That's a smart move if it means they can profit maximize later on. They could also sales revenue maximize, which I've shown by the blue dot here, which means that they'll be operating at a much lower price than they would if they profit maximized at P1, which means that they could outprice competition and force them out of the market, which is also called predatory pricing. When explaining this though, it's crucial to remember the revenue or sales maximization diagram, where output is higher and price is lower than the profit maximization point. The firm's not profit maximizing yet, but it's still acting in a way that will make sense strategically and allow them to profit maximize without competition in the future. So again, rationality helps us understand the behavior of firms. But let's evaluate that. First, the principal agent problem. Rationality assumes that firms are united in their objectives, but in real life, they're not. The owners and shareholders might want to profit maximize, but the managers, the people actually making decisions, might want different things like sales growth or higher market share because it boosts their bonuses or job security. That leads to satisfaction behavior, doing just enough to keep both sides happy without actually optimizing anything. And the managers are able to do this due to the principal agent problem, which is the divorce of ownership and control between managers and shareholders. I'm telling you, if you include this in your essay, you'll get top marks. Second, we've also got the issue of bounded rationality. That's where decision makers are limited by imperfect information, time, or even cognitive biases. Firms entering, for example, the renewable energy market don't always know what the future holds. There's uncertainty around policy changes, consumer demand, and technological advances. So even if they want to make the best decision, they might not have all the facts. That weakens the idea that firms always act like textbook rational actors. Okay, finally, we need a conclusion, a judgment where we weigh up our points and show the examiner we really know what we're talking about. So it's really important we get this perfect. Ultimately, rationality, in theory, is extremely important in understanding the behavior of firms. By knowing they profit maximize, we can predict their behavior, how much they produce, what markets they enter, even predict the tactics they will employ to achieve profit maximization in the future. But it isn't so simple as that. Rationality is an economic theory, and real life often differs from theory. Most importantly, rationality is significantly limited by firms' imperfect information. Their inability to assess all possibilities means they're unable in the strictest sense to act rationally. Firms also may not act in a rational, self-interested way due to ethical considerations or the actions of managers who influence the firm to choose different objectives. The point to take away from this is that rationality as a concept is very important in understanding the behavior of firms, but in the real world, it's limited significantly. That's the essay plan done. I know it's more than you need for a 12 marker, but they could always ask it as a 25 marker, in which case you'll need to use these developed points. Thanks for watching Spec to Success. I really appreciate you staying around to the end, and hopefully this video may have cleared up any questions you might have had about firms and rationality. If you've got any questions, topic suggestions, or even suggestions about future content, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one of them and always appreciate your support. See you in the next video.